Hello, everyone. My name is Priya Bhutani. Thank you so much for joining us today for our monthly webinar. In today's webinar, we will be discussing some important updates to medical device regulations in Australia. For those of you who may not be familiar with RegDesk, RegDesk is a regulatory approval software that uses machine learning and AI to help RA teams prepare and publish global technical files within hours. RA teams can also access up-to-date and concise checklists of regulatory requirements, collaborate with regional partners, track registrations, and understand the impact of change assessments. Our approach to regulatory is unique and one that gives our clients a competitive advantage. If you'd like to learn more or have any specific questions related to your business needs, we'd be happy to schedule a call to discuss further. I'm very excited because with us today, we have two leading experts from Australia, Piers Morgan and Dr. Derek Beech. Piers Morgan, Mr. Morgan is an experienced CEO and business development executive who provides business advisory and NED services for foreign companies, setting up business enterprises in Australia or New Zealand. He has worked for Australian and international businesses in a wide range of industries. Mr. Morgan is currently Executive Director of Global Alliance Partners, which provides consulting and sponsor services for medical device companies looking to register their products with the TGA in Australia or MedSafe in New Zealand. He also has a history of successfully seeking approvals for medical devices in Australia. Dr. Derek Beech has been a medical device consultant since 1996, specializing in global regulatory affairs, quality systems, and reimbursement. His consulting service, medical technology consulting, MTC, has helped over 500 companies get their products to market in Australia and internationally. From 1985 to 1996, he was the director of the Therapeutic Devices branch of TGA, during which time he created and directed medical device regulations in Australia. He has spent his entire career in medical device research, education, and management roles, has published and lectured widely, and has received honors and awards for research and communication in biomaterials and in regulatory policy. With such esteemed speakers and our panelists, we're very excited to share their knowledge with you. But before we get started, we'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us again. At the end of this meeting, we will hold a brief Q&A. We encourage your participation, so please refer to the chat button on your screen. In the interest of time, please submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we'll try to address as many of your questions as we can. In case we run out of time, please email us your questions and we'll try to address them via email. Also, if you'd like to get in touch with any of our panelists, let us know and we will connect you. We can share their email and connect you directly with either of them or both of them. Also, we would love to get your feedback on today's webinar and ideas you may have for future webinar topics. Piers and Derek, welcome. It is truly a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you.
Before we get started, and I know we have quite a lot to discuss, Piers, if you don't mind, can you share with us what Global Alliance Partners does in Australia?
I certainly can. Thank you, Priya. And welcome, everyone. Derek and I are both come from Sydney in Australia. Global Alliance Partners works on the commercial side, and our focus is helping foreign companies come to Australia and set up successfully. In relation to the TGA, we act as a sponsor, and we also help companies make sure they structure the way they enter Australia correctly in terms of tax and the right organisation. So there are basically four ways to come into Australia and sell. One of them is to sell online and ship into Australia directly to a customer. Another way is to sell online and warehouse in Australia and dispatch from Australia. A third way is to use a distributor, sell to a distributor and ship to a distributor. And the fourth way is to set up a presence in Australia, a legal presence and an operation. Each of those has its own tax and regulatory issues. And we help companies to deal with those issues. And then later we help them with any other services they need around that in terms of how they get into the market and how they sell. So that's basically what we do, but that's not the primary focus of today. So I'll pass back to you, Priya, and you could, and Derek can continue.
Thank you so much. So if you have any questions, especially around establishment, license, establishment, and how you can establish your organization in Australia or New Zealand, Piers definitely has expertise in that, among other things. So let's move on because we have quite a lot to discuss regarding regulatory changes in Australia. So before that, Derek, do you mind giving us a high-level regulatory framework for Australia? Sure. and how the TGA works?
Okay. Well, just to finish off what you were saying, I was one of the 3 founders of the TGA. So I started this whole business of medical device regulation. So nobody's been in it longer than I have. The TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration, was founded in 1990, and I was the architect of the medical devices part of the regulations. And the current system is basically similar to the European CE marking system, in that it's up until recently there were only 2 ways you could get TGA registration: either using the European CE marking or getting conformity assessment with TGA. However, a major change happened a year or so ago when, after a review by an independent body, and now it's possible under certain circumstances to use FDA, Canada, or Japan registration. However, in all those cases, the manufacturer must have an MDD certification, in other words, a medical device single audit program certification, to go with the Canadian, Japanese, or FDA. So, so you can use CE marking, FDA, Canada, or Japan, but CE marking is still better. The TGA is presently aligning with the medical devices regulation, which recently came in a couple of months ago, I think it was. But there are differences. There is a mutual recognition agreement with Europe, but Australia is still an independent country, and nothing is automatic. So Australia is strictly regulated. It's got very defined borders. It's a continent as well as a country, and it has no land borders. So it's more regulated than the FDA, than USA or Europe. It has a high standard of medical care and uses the latest technology. It's a very transparent organization, and it has a good website. The application system is internet-based, but it's not user-friendly particularly. You need to know what you're doing. It's not like doing a bank transfer. So, and TGA is a bit like can issue CE marking, but a TGA now more recently has been able to issue fines. So if you contravene the regulations here, you will get fined by TGA quite significantly. There is a high level of reimbursement for prostheses. So you get a good, it's the standard of living and the cost of, and you get paid well. Medical devices get paid well. So, and finally, just an introduction, New Zealand, which is a companion country, you might say, has no medical device regulation. And so it's very easy to get into New Zealand. Okay.
Thank you. That helps set the foundation. Moving on to, I know you and I, the 3 of us discussed regulatory changes that have taken place. There have been, I know just recently there were two significant ones guidances that were released. But can you share some of the most recent regulatory changes released by the TGA?
Well, TGA had a major review by an independent body, and also so it's making changes as a consequence of that, as well as it's trying to align with the medical device regulations in Europe, but as far as possible. So some recent changes, for example, is that anything that's involved in retaining the motion of the spine is now been upgraded, more highly classified. Anything temporarily in contact with the central circulatory system or the central nervous system has been up classified. Substances that are devices that are act by skin absorption are now been the classification has gone up for those, as well as inhalation devices such as spacers and devices that provide a therapy with a diagnostic function, such as automatic external defibrillators, have been increased in their classification. As well, TGA has more recently centralized advertising regulations. Before, advertising was controlled by more than one body. Now TGA is centralized in TGA, so they monitor all advertising of medical products, and it's illegal, for example, to advertise anything that needs a medical intervention by a doctor. So it's illegal to advertise anything that treats or diagnoses a serious disease or illness. So
and when will these go into effect, these up classifications? Is there a timeline for it?
Well, it varies, but basically they're coming in now. Anything you want to do from now on, well, these new changes will be required. So it's happened for new devices from now.
Okay, and where can a client check for whether their product falls within the categories? Are there additional categories other than the ones you mentioned, or only the ones that you mentioned?
Well, those are the basic recent changes, but I mean, TGA has a website, tga.gov.au, and it's got most of the information on there if you can find it. But or they can come to me and ask me. There's something very new that's just happened, is that up until now, if you had a medical device that had a medicinal or a biological component, then you had to get TGA conformity assessment. Well, that, quite surprisingly, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've now changed that. So now that if you had to get TGA conformity assessment, you were talking about more than $100,000 in TGA fees and probably 12 months review. But now they've decided it's possible to use a CE marking, although they will be subject to a full audit. So it's got a lot cheaper potentially to it's somebody saying they're difficulty hearing me. It's got a lot cheaper now, not necessarily easier, but cheaper to get registration of medical devices with a biological or medicinal component.
Okay, I know that those are some key takeaways, but now can we switch to the 2 guidance documents that came out, one regarding software devices and the other one for personalized devices. Can you provide some highlights of these 2, specifically software, because that's huge?
Well, I can just briefly summarize the personalized devices. Up until now, the custom-made devices, as they were called, for a particular patient were not subject to registration. Now that's changed in that most what was previously called custom-made devices have now become patient-matched devices, and providing they are manufactured within a defined design envelope, that is, for example, and if it's basically a knee prosthesis and you just change it, adapt it a little bit for each patient, then they now must be registered and they go through the same registration process as any other manufactured device. And what's interesting, if you're selling a device, for example, which you provide raw materials and say a 3D printer, then you'll have to set up something called a medical device production system, which is a whole new concept. And you'll have to have this medical device production system, which is meant to be instructions for the healthcare practitioner. That will have to be registered with the TGA. And then there's another category now called adaptable medical devices, which are devices which can be adapted by the medical practitioner for the particular patient. So the whole thing has been broken down now into custom made into several categories. But the bottom line is that what were exempt previously are now, most of the things that were exempt are now going to be required to be registered. Okay, that's personalized medical devices. The second thing is the software. Now the software or devices containing software have been basically new classification rules have been introduced, which are basically dependent on what the severity, if it's diagnosing or treating, the severity of the condition will increase the regulatory classification. Also, to whom the information or the treatment is being done by, whether it's by an individual or by a healthcare practitioner. So if it's being done by an individual, the classification is higher than it's lower if it's a practitioner that's doing it. Also, if it's a question of like a matrix of to who is being using the information from the software and the severity of the condition to which the software is being applied. So it's a whole new. It's really quite complicated, but it really brings regulation of software into the current age. Oh, the other thing is too, as a consequence of this new regulation, wellness products, things that are for lifestyle, like smartwatches, like wellness software for individuals has been exempted, as well as software for transmitting information or recording patient images. So there's been some things cut out of the system, as well as this whole new classification system. But it's quite a complex thing, and it's quite a brain stretching to try and apply it to a particular person's software. So, but I can help with that. And they are. I was just going to say. They're both being implemented. Any new product that needs registration, it's now required to comply with both the personalized devices and the new software requirements. It's now in place.
So
any new applications.
if a client has a foreign manufacturer has a software device, they should go in and check what product classification their device falls under, and then follow the compliance route.
Well, yes, and it's the same, basically the same requirements as a CE marking. I don't know. I'm not sure how. I really couldn't tell you what MDR has done with this, but yes, it's the bottom line is there's a lot. The regulatory software has been the classifications have significantly increased, risk classification.
And I know you touched upon the TGA's thoughts on EU MDR. Do they have a timeline, and as what they're working towards is, will they accept, essentially, I shouldn't say accept, but I know there is an alliance there. So what do you think, how do you think the MDR will impact the current regulatory requirements and framework?
Our TGA is trying to align, is doing their best to align with the medical device regulations, but and generally it will align with the medical device regulations, but not always. There's some areas where it will differ. So we have to just, so if the medical device regulation is equivalent to the TGA requirement, then you can use CE marking to pursue registration here.
And lastly, before we go into Q&A, can you share some insight, and this is for both of you, some reasons why companies either struggle or fail to get approval with the TGA in a timely manner? Well,
there's one major reason, and that is the clinical evidence report. The TGA notified bodies in Europe are commercial organizations. The European, shall I say, the European requirements for clinical evidence are similar to the TGA, but the European notified bodies are commercial organizations, and they can be somewhat more flexible about what they accept for clinical evidence. TGA is a government body, and it's very strict on ensuring that clinical evidence complies with the guidelines. So that's the major cause of failure. If an audit is conducted and the TGA requires clinical evidence to be provided, it must comply with the guidelines, and that and they're very strict about that. So that is the major cause of failure.
Thank you. We have some questions that have been posted here. So one of the questions is, can manufacturers use MDD certification as evidence for ARTG inclusion of medicinal containing devices?
Yes, as of very recently, the answer is yes, but that's very new, and the TGA will be conducting an audit, so you've got to have good documentation, and the medicine will have to be independently reviewed by the medicinal area by the drug people. But so the status of the medicine in Australia is also separately considered.
The other question is, can you comment on Australia's UDI requirements?
Oh yes, I meant to mention that actually. It's a work in progress. There's lots of seminars and talk about aligning with FDA or Europe, but all I can say is it is coming in, and the TGA are doing their best, but they want to align as much as possible with international practice, and that's being quite challenging at the moment. So it's not in place yet.
And they haven't provided a timeline either, right, as to when they propose to have that?
They're trying to do it as soon as possible, but it's difficult. No time, no fixed timeline, no.
Okay. Another question is, to honor the CE mark for TGA registration, does the CE mark have to be for high classification EU medical devices?
It have to be for?
To honor the CE mark for
Yeah, I'm just reading it, yeah.
does the CE mark have to be for high classification EU devices?
It can be for any classification. It doesn't have to be high, no. Except for class 1, of course, where no CE marking is required, no CE certificate is required. Well, it must be CE, even if a class 1 is CE marked, yes. It's the easy way in, quicker way in the CE marking at any classification.
Last question that we've received is, what are the timescales for compliance of legacy devices already on the market?
I don't quite understand that question. The legacy devices, what does that mean?
The products that are currently or been sort of grandfathered in or have been selling, been registered in the country for a long time.
Well, they can continue to be registered. There's no unless they're being reclassified. If in the case of a product that's on them that's registered, but the classification has changed or is affected by some of these changes in recent changes, then there is a phase-in period, typically of 3 years, to change to enable you to change adapt to the new requirements. So,
Okay.
2024.
Okay. So they have till 2024 to if the legacy products have been reclassified, then they have up till 2024 to register those products.
With one qualification, if they've been already registered here and the classification changed, usually you have to notify the TGA, and in 2 cases of personalized custom-made medical devices and software, you had to notify them by the 25 August that you were going to reclassify them. Otherwise, to give you the 3-year phase in. But new products coming in have to comply with the new regulations now. So there is a phase in, but you usually have to do it. Usually qualify for that by notifying the TJ that you are affected and intend to upgrade your classification.
This is just a generic regulatory question since we have a minute left. We get asked this a lot about Australia specifically and other markets as well. For clinical investigations, so for very high risk devices, does Australia accept clinical data from the US, EU outside of Australia, or does Australia?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
The only qualification to that, it must be done properly. It must be done according to the international standard for clinical trials, and it must be done ethically and to a quality of conducted in a quality way.
Got it. And a few seconds left, another question came up. Could software as a medical device fall under a different risk classification than it does under EU MDR?
I haven't done a comparison, and TJ has not done a comparison either at the moment, but it could well do so. I'm not sure how the MDR classifies software at the moment. I haven't checked that. But step one is to make sure that there is an alignment. If you want to get your product registered and you want to use CE marking, it's important to check that the classification from the MDR and TJ do align. If they don't align, then you can't use CE marking.
Okay, and last, another one came up, and we'll end after this. It says patient implant card will be required for already existing devices from the 1st of December of this year. Yes, so they're saying, do manufacturers have to provide PIC separately, or is it for MD, which will enter after the 1st of December in Australia?
The deadline for that's the last stage. The sooner you start doing it, the better, but it must be done after the 1st of December. But you can do it as soon as you like. Patient implant cards and patient information leaflets are now required, but the deadline, so right now you don't have to do it, but from the 1st of December you must do it. Both patient information cards and patient information leaflets. Yes, sir.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Derek and Piers, and thank you everyone who attended and joined us today. Really appreciate your time. And once again, for attendees, if you'd like to get in touch with either of our panelists, please let us know, and we will provide you their email addresses and the contact information, and we can also send an introductory email.
Okay. Thank you, Priya. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.